The message arrived at 11:47 p.m., not through diplomatic channels, not through my Foreign Affairs office, not through any of the official systems that exist precisely so that world powers can pressure smaller nations with the appearance of civility. It came directly, personally, deliberately, and it contained 4 words that were designed to end my presidency before morning. You have 24 hours. Now, I've been threatened before. Every leader who refuses to play by the rules of the powerful gets threatened. It comes with the position, it comes with the choices. But this threat was different, because this time they weren't just threatening me. They were threatening the 22 million people who trusted me to stand between them and exactly this kind of pressure. What I did in the next 24 hours, the calls I made, the decision I reached at 3 a.m., and the single response I gave that the entire world was not prepared for. That is what I'm going to tell you today. Stay with me, because nothing about what happened next was predictable. Let me take you back to the night it started. I was in my office reviewing security briefings, standard procedure for a country still fighting terrorism on 3 fronts, when my chief of staff entered without knocking. That alone told me something was wrong. He never enters without knocking. He placed a single printed document on my desk. No words, just the document. I read it once, then I read it again. Then I set it down and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. The document was an ultimatum, formally worded, diplomatically phrased, but an ultimatum nonetheless. It came from a coalition of Western interests who had been watching Burkina Faso's growing independence with increasing discomfort. The demands were specific. Reverse our decision to terminate certain foreign surveillance contracts on Burkinabe soil. Restore access to mineral extraction agreements we had suspended pending renegotiation. Issue a public statement realigning Burkina Faso with Western positions on 3 ongoing global conflicts. Do all of this within 24 hours. Or face, and I am using their exact language here, a recalibration of the international community's relationship with your administration. I set the document down. My chief of staff was watching me carefully, looking for signs of fear, calculation, panic. The normal human responses to being told that powerful forces have decided your time may be up. He saw none of those things, because in that moment I wasn't afraid. I wasn't calculating, I wasn't panicking. I was remembering something my father told me when I was 7 years old. He said, Ibrahim, a man who can be threatened into betraying his people, was never really their leader. He was just their temporary manager. I looked at my chief of staff and said, get me a pen. What I'm about to tell you has not been reported by any major international media outlet, because what happened in the 6 hours after that ultimatum arrived doesn't fit the story they want to tell about Africa, the story where African leaders are isolated, outgunned, and ultimately compliant. Within 2 hours of receiving the ultimatum, I had made 9 phone calls, not to beg, not to negotiate, not to find a graceful way to comply, while saving face. I called to build something, in real time, under pressure, with a deadline counting down. The first call was to a fellow African head of state, who had faced a similar ultimatum 3 years earlier, and had, under enormous pressure, partially complied. I didn't call to judge him. I called to ask him one question. Did compliance make them respect you more, or did it make them believe you could always be pressured again? The silence on the line lasted 11 seconds. I counted. Then he said quietly, it never stopped, Traoré. Once you show them the door opens, they never stop knocking. That was all I needed to hear. The second call was to my intelligence chief. I needed to understand exactly who had sent the ultimatum, not the names on the document, but the real architecture of interest behind it. Who benefited from our surveillance contracts? Who lost money when we suspended the mineral agreements? Whose geopolitical positioning was disrupted by our independent foreign policy statements? By 2 a.m., I had a complete picture. And here's what that picture showed me. Something that will reframe everything you think you know about how power operates in Africa. The ultimatum hadn't come because Burkina Faso was weak. It had come because Burkina Faso was becoming strong. Every demand in that document targeted a decision we had made from a position of growing confidence, not desperation. They weren't threatening a failing state. They were trying to stop a rising one. That realization changed everything about how I approached the next 18 hours. There is a specific quality to 3 a.m. that I believe every leader who has faced a genuine crisis understands. The noise of the day is gone. The advisors have given their advice. The intelligence reports have been read. The phone calls have been made. And you are left alone with the most important question a leader can face. What do I actually believe is right? Not what is safe. Not what is strategic. Not what preserves alliances or protects relationships or minimizes institutional friction. What is right? I walked to my window at 3:07 a.m. and looked out at Ouagadougou. The city was quiet. 22 million people sleeping, trusting. without knowing it, that the person they had chosen to lead them was not, at that exact moment, preparing to trade their sovereignty for international approval. I thought about the mineral agreements. Those minerals belong to the Burkinabe people, not to me, not to any foreign corporation, not to any international framework designed by people who have never set foot in our country. To my people. I thought about the surveillance contracts, the right to know what happens on our own soil. That is not a negotiating chip. That is the definition of sovereignty. I thought about the foreign policy statements they wanted me to reverse. My positions on those conflicts weren't random political calculations. They were the product of looking at the evidence, consulting my conscience, and saying what I actually believed was true. And then I thought about something else entirely. I thought about what message compliance would send not to the powers who sent the ultimatum, but to the next generation of African leaders watching this moment. The young presidents, the future prime ministers, the students in Accra and Lagos and Nairobi who were going to inherit the Africa that my generation built or failed to build. What would I be teaching them if I folded at 3 a.m. because powerful people applied pressure? I would be teaching them that African sovereignty has a price, and that price is whatever the market of international pressure decides on any given day. I walked back to my desk. I picked up the pen I had asked for hours earlier, and I began to write my response. I want to read you exactly what I wrote, because every word was chosen deliberately, and every word landed exactly as I intended. I wrote, Burkina Faso has received your communication. We have considered its contents carefully and completely. Our response is as follows. The sovereignty of Burkina Faso is not subject to external deadlines. The decisions of the Burkinabe government reflect the will of the Burkinabe people, and will not be reversed under pressure from any foreign interest, however powerful. We are available for respectful diplomatic engagement at any time. We are not available for ultimatums. This matter is now closed. 47 words. No anger, no accusations, no dramatic declarations. Just clarity. My communications director read it 3 times. Then he looked up and said, Sir, they're going to see this as a provocation. I said they sent me an ultimatum at midnight. I sent them 47 words at dawn. If one of those things is a provocation, we have very different definitions of the word. The response went out at 6:23 a.m., before most of the world had finished its morning coffee. By 9 a.m., it had been leaked to international media. By noon, it was being discussed in diplomatic circles across 3 continents. By evening, it had become something I had not planned for and did not expect. It had become a symbol, not just for Burkina Faso, not just for West Africa, but for every nation large and small that had ever received a midnight ultimatum and wondered if refusal was even possible. But here's what I haven't told you yet. What was happening inside Burkina Faso while I was writing those 47 words was something that no foreign power had calculated, something that couldn't be measured by satellite surveillance or intelligence reports or diplomatic cables, something that changed the outcome of everything. The ultimatum had leaked before I sent my response, not from my government. I believe to this day it was leaked deliberately by those who sent it, expecting that public knowledge of the pressure would accelerate my compliance. They miscalculated. By 5 a.m., radio stations across Burkina Faso were broadcasting the story. By 7 a.m., people were already gathering in public spaces, not in organized protest, not directed by any political organization, but spontaneously, organically. Because when people who have fought for their dignity hear that someone is trying to take it away, they don't wait for instructions. They just move. I received a report from my security team at 8 a.m. Sir, there are gatherings in 17 cities. No violence, no disruption. People are simply present. Simply present. Do you understand what that means in the language of a people who have survived colonization, military coups, economic warfare, and foreign interference for generations? It means we see what is happening, we are watching, and we are not afraid. A market woman in Ouagadougou, a woman who sells vegetables and has no connection to politics or diplomacy or international relations, closed her stall at 7 a.m. and walked to the nearest public square. A reporter asked her why. She said, someone is trying to tell my president what to do. I came to remind them that he already has people telling him what to do. Us. When that quote reached my desk, I read it 4 times, because in one sentence that woman had articulated something that took me 47 words to say. The people of Burkina Faso were not waiting to see if their president would be strong. They were showing the world that strength in this country does not live in one office or one person. It lives in the streets, in the markets, in the 22 million people who had decided long before I picked up my pen that their sovereignty was not for sale. By the time the 24-hour deadline passed, 3 things had happened that nobody, including me, had predicted. First, the coalition that sent the ultimatum had gone silent. No follow-up communication. No escalation. No recalibration of the international community's relationship with my administration. Just silence. Because here's what ultimatums depend on, that their senders never admit. They depend on the recipient's belief that compliance is the only rational choice. The moment I responded with 47 words of calm refusal, backed by 22 million people standing in public squares, the ultimatum lost its only source of power, the fear. Second, within 72 hours, 4 African heads of state had contacted me privately, not to congratulate me, though some did that too, but to ask me something far more significant. How did you decide? In that moment alone at 3 a.m., how did you decide that refusal was possible? I told each of them the same thing. I didn't decide refusal was possible. I decided compliance was impossible. There's a difference. One requires courage. The other just requires clarity. Third, and this is the development that I believe matters most for the future. A professor of international relations at a major European university published an analysis of what had happened. In it, he wrote something that has been quoted in diplomatic circles ever since. He wrote that the Burkina Faso response represented, and I'm paraphrasing here, a new model of small nations, sovereignty, one based not on military power or economic leverage, but on the credibility that comes from a government that visibly, demonstrably reflects the will of its people. He called it the sovereignty of alignment, the idea that a leader whose people stand with him in public squares at dawn is more protected from external pressure than a leader with a larger army, but a more distant population. I read that analysis and thought, this professor has understood something that took me years of leading a country under pressure to understand. Power is not just what you have. Power is what your people are willing to stand for. I want to leave you with something real. Not inspiration for inspiration's sake. Not words designed to make you feel something for 4 minutes and then forget by the time you reach the next video. Something that stays. The 24-hour ultimatum was designed to test one thing: whether I believed that the approval of powerful foreign interests was more important than the trust of my own people. Every person watching this has faced a version of that test. Maybe not from foreign governments. Maybe from employers who expected silence in exchange for security. Maybe from institutions that offered acceptance on the condition of conformity. Maybe from relationships that required you to make yourself smaller to keep the peace. The question is always the same. Whose approval are you governing your life by? The people who sent me that ultimatum believed, based on decades of experience with African leaders, that foreign approval was something I couldn't afford to lose. They didn't know that I had already made my choice about whose approval mattered. The market woman who closed her stall at 7 a.m., the students who gathered in 17 cities, the 22 million people who had trusted me with something far more precious than international recognition. Their trust. You cannot lead people you are willing to betray. You cannot represent people you are willing to trade. And you cannot build anything lasting on a foundation of compliance with people who see your sovereignty as a negotiating position. The 24 hours passed. The deadline expired. And Burkina Faso was still standing, not because we were powerful enough to resist, but because we were clear enough to refuse. That clarity is available to every person, every community, every nation that decides that some things are not for sale.